So let's imagine a situation where if the price is 10, producers will want to produce nothing, and they have well, you'll see it's relative to what the consumers are going to be an inelastic supply curve, and the consumers, if the price is 500, they aren't going to want to buy anything, and we'll have an elastic demand curve. And let's assume that the equilibrium quantity is going to be 2,000, and that the equilibrium price ends up at being $450. That the equilibrium price ends up being $450. So the producer surplus would be, I'll put this in green here, would be this area, which would be a half of 440 times 2,000. 440, of course, is 450 minus 10 times 2,000, which is the quantity, and that's 440,000. And let's say the consumer surplus, and why don't I do that in blue? The consumer surplus is going to be a half of 50, which is 500 minus 450, times the quantity of 2,000. And so that's going to equal 50,000. And so our total surplus, we're going to be 490,000. And now let's say the government wants to impose a $50 excise tax. And so again, we have to find the place where the demand curve and the supply curve are $50 apart and figure out what the quantity is at that point. And I will tell you that it's going to be 1796. And so we're going to have 204 quantity less than the 2,000 that we had before. And at this quantity, the quantity demanded, or the price that is same as the quantity demanded of 1976 is going to be 455. And the price on the supply curve, or the quantities, well, in the quantities 1476, it matches on the supply curve 405. And then, of course, there's $50 apart. Remember, it's the $50 excise tax. And notice of the $50 excise tax, 45 of it is being absorbed by producers, and only 5% is being passed on to consumers. So the government has imposed a $50 tax, and yet consumers have only seen their price go up by $5. And that's because the supply is more inelastic than demand, or demand is more elastic than supply. And now we can again compute the producer surplus and the consumer surplus. So the new consumer surplus is going to be half times 500 minus 455, because this was 500 is at zero, the intercept there, minus 455, times 1796. And that's going to equal 40,410, which is you know, almost 10,000 less than the 50,000. But the producer surplus is really going to get whacked. And so the producer surplus is going to be a half of 405 minus 10 times 1796. And that's going to equal 354,710. And remember, before it was 440,000. So they've lost almost 100,000 in producer surplus. And then the tax revenue is going to be 89,800. That's the $50 times the 1796. 89,800. And if you take 490,000, which is the old total surplus, subtract 40,410, subtract 354,710, and 89,800, you're left with a deadweight loss of 50,000, or 55080, and the area of this triangle is going to be a half times 2,000 minus 1796, which is our old quantity minus our new quantity, times the amount of the tax, which is 50, which is also the height of this triangle here, and that's going to be 5,100. And so again, we had a little bit of rounding. As you can see, 5080 and 5100 are very close to each other. And so don't worry, in any exam or test, I'm going to make sure that the numbers really work out so they won't have to do any of this rounding. But see that in the situation where the supply curve is more inelastic, most of the cost of the tax is imposed on the producers, 45 out of the $50, while when demand was inelastic, most of the cost of a tax was passed on to consumers by the producers in the form of higher prices. Those are the examples with regard to taxes, and hope you have a good weekend. Take care.